Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel T. Today we're diving into a topic that's been making waves across North America, the trade relationship between Canada and the United States under President Donald Trump in 2024 and 2025, with a special focus on energy exports and tariffs. This is a story about pressure, strategy, and how Canada is carving out a bold new path in a turbulent trade war. So, let's set the stage. The relationship between Canada and the United States has always been close, geographically, economically, culturally. We're neighbors, allies, and the world's largest bilateral trading partners. But under President Trump's second term, things have gotten, let's say, a little rocky. Trump has made tariffs his go-to tool for shaking things up, and Canada has felt the heat. In 2024, he slapped a 25% tariff on Canadian goods outside the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement, or CUSMA, and then cranked it up to 35% by August 2025. Ouch. We're talking about industries like lumber, steel, aluminum, and manufactured products taking a serious hit. These tariffs threaten jobs, disrupt supply chains, and send shockwaves through entire sectors of the Canadian economy. But here's the twist. Not every sector is feeling the same pain. One area stands out like a lighthouse in this storm, Canada's energy sector. From oil and gas to electricity and uranium, energy exports are proving to be Canada's shield against Trump's trade war. And it's not just about protection. Canada, under Prime Minister Mark Carney, is turning this pressure into a chance to rewrite the playbook, leveraging its energy dominance to counter American tariffs and build new opportunities on the global stage. So let's unpack this and see how Canada's energy strategy is becoming a game changer. Let's talk numbers for a second, because they tell a powerful story. According to Natural Resources Canada, in 2024, Canada was exporting nearly 4 million barrels of crude oil per day to the United States. That's not a typo, 4 million barrels every single day. Add to that about 8.12 billion cubic feet of natural gas daily and over 11 terawatt-hours of electricity over the year. Oh, and let's not forget uranium. Canada supplies 27% of the US's uranium imports, making it the single largest source. These aren't just random stats, they're the backbone of the US economy. American industries, power grids, and even national security depend on this steady flow of Canadian energy. Now imagine Trump trying to slap heavy tariffs on that. Shutting off Alberta's oil or Saskatchewan's uranium would be like pulling the plug on the US economy. It could lead to blackouts, fuel shortages, and serious national security risks. The US might be the world's largest oil producer, but it still relies heavily on Canadian crude, especially for refineries in the Midwest. The completion of the expanded Trans Mountain pipeline in 2024 pushed Canadian crude exports to a record high of 4.3 million barrels per day, according to the US Energy Information Administration. That's not something you can just replace overnight. This dependency gives Canada what I like to call quiet leverage. It's not something Ottawa shouts about from the rooftops, but it's always there in the background during trade talks in Washington. Trump's tariffs might sting on things like steel or lumber, but when it comes to energy, his hands are tied. Why? Because the US doesn't have immediate alternatives to Canada's scale and reliability. And that's where Canada's strategy starts to take shape. When Trump announced those 35% tariffs on non-CUSMA goods, it hit hard. Softwood lumber, steel, aluminum, copper, Canadian producers felt the pain almost immediately. Jobs were at risk, supply chains got tangled, and prices for consumers started creeping up. But energy? That's a different story. Trump imposed a lower 10% tariff on Canadian energy exports like oil, gas, and electricity, compared to the 25 or 35% on other goods. Why the special treatment? Well, it's simple. The US needs Canada's energy too much to risk a full-on tariff assault. Think about it. The US Midwest relies on Canadian crude for its refineries. Power grids in states like Michigan and New York lean on Canadian electricity and uranium to keep the lights on. Even Trump, with all his talk about America first, knows that jacking up energy tariffs too high could backfire. Higher energy costs would mean higher gas prices at the pump, bigger utility bills for households, and a hit to industries that rely on cheap power. That's not exactly the lower prices message Trump campaigned on in 2024. So, while sectors like lumber and steel are scrambling to deal with these tariffs, Canada's energy sector is holding strong. That 10% tariff on energy isn't nothing. It adds costs, sure, but it's a far cry from the 35% hammering other industries. This gives Canada a unique advantage. Energy isn't just a shield. It's a foundation for a broader strategy to push back against Trump's trade war. Here's where things get really interesting. Canada isn't just sitting back and taking the punches. Under Prime Minister Mark Carney, the government is making bold moves to turn this trade war into an opportunity. The big headline? A massive $500 billion investment in energy and port infrastructure. Yeah, you heard that right. $500 billion. This isn't just about patching up roads or building a few new pipelines. It's a full-on transformation to make Canada an energy superpower and reduce its reliance on the US market. Let's break it down. The plan includes major expansions at key ports like the Port of Montreal and the Port of Churchill in northern Manitoba. The Port of Montreal is already a hub for critical mineral shipments, and its operators estimate that an expansion could bring in $140 million a year in new revenue. That's a big deal for Quebec and for Canada's economy as a whole. Then there's the Port of Churchill, sitting on Hudson Bay. This port is being positioned as a gateway for liquefied natural gas, LNG, to reach overseas markets, especially in Europe. Now, LNG is a big part of this story, so let's talk about it. Just a few years ago, back in 2022, then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said there wasn't a strong business case for shipping Canadian LNG across the Atlantic. Fast forward to 2025, and that stance has done a complete 180. Why? Because Europe is desperate to break free from Russian gas, especially after the geopolitical shifts of the past few years. Canada, with its vast natural gas reserves and rock-solid political stability, is perfectly positioned to step in and meet that demand. Carney's announcement of this massive infrastructure plan sent shockwaves through the investment world. He said his phone was blowing up with calls from investors the moment the plan was unveiled. That's not just talk. That's a signal that global markets see Canada as a serious player. Let's zoom in on LNG for a minute, because this is where Canada's strategy gets really exciting. Liquefied natural gas is natural gas that's cooled to a liquid state so it can be shipped overseas in massive tankers. It's a big deal for countries looking to power their economies without relying on coal or, in Europe's case, Russian pipelines. Canada has the resources to be a global LNG leader, but for years it lagged behind countries like Qatar and Australia. Not anymore. The Port of Churchill expansion is a key piece of this puzzle. Located in northern Manitoba, Churchill is strategically positioned on Hudson Bay, giving it access to Arctic shipping routes and European markets. Turning Churchill into an LNG export hub isn't just about economics, it's about geopolitics. Europe's energy crisis has made reliable suppliers like Canada incredibly valuable. By investing in LNG infrastructure, Canada is saying, hey, we're not just here to supply the US, we're ready to play on the world stage. And it's not just Churchill. The Port of Montreal's expansion will boost Canada's ability to ship critical minerals, like lithium, nickel, and cobalt, that are essential for things like electric vehicle batteries and solar panels. These minerals are in high demand globally, and Canada's got them in spades. By upgrading its ports and streamlining approvals through a new major projects office set to launch by Labor Day 2025, Canada is making it easier to get these resources to market. This office will fast-track environmental reviews and coordinate with provinces and territories to get projects off the ground quickly. It's a signal that Canada means business. Now let's connect the dots. Trump's tariffs are designed to pressure allies into bending to his will. For Canada, those tariffs have hurt. There's no sugarcoating it. Industries like lumber and steel are struggling, and consumers are starting to feel the pinch with higher prices. But instead of just reacting to Trump's moves, Canada is playing a longer game. By doubling down on energy infrastructure and opening new markets in Europe, Canada is reducing its exposure to the US market. This is huge. Think about it. Over 70% of Canada's exports go to the United States. That's a massive dependency, and it makes Canada vulnerable to sudden policy shifts like Trump's tariffs. By diversifying its trade partners, especially with Europe, which is hungry for stable energy supplies, Canada is building resilience. If the US wants to play hardball with tariffs, Canada can say, "Fine, we've got other buyers lined up." That's leverage, and it's a big reason why Carney's government is pushing so hard on this energy strategy. Speaking of Europe, let's talk about Prime Minister Mark Carney's recent moves on the global stage. While Trump's been turning up the heat in North America, Carney's been jetting across the Atlantic to strengthen ties with European leaders. He's been meeting with heads of state in Germany, Poland and Latvia, as well as top business executives. The pitch? Canada is a reliable, stable supplier of energy and critical minerals at a time when Europe is desperate for both. This isn't just about trade, it's about geopolitics. Europe's been burned by its reliance on Russian gas, and the EU is looking for partners it can trust. Canada fits the bill perfectly. It's got the resources, the infrastructure, and the political stability to be a long-term partner. Plus, Canada's already got boots on the ground in Europe through Operation Reassurance, with Canadian troops stationed in Poland and Latvia as part of NATO's efforts to counter Russian influence. That military presence adds credibility to Canada's economic pitch. It says, "We're not just here to sell you gas, we're a partner you can count on." Carney's European tour is also a subtle message to the US. Canada's not putting all its eggs in one basket. By building stronger ties with Europe, Canada is diversifying its options and reducing its vulnerability to American pressure. It's a classic middle power move, using strategic partnerships to punch above your weight. And it's working. European leaders are listening, investors are calling, and Canada's starting to look like a global energy powerhouse. Let's shift gears for a moment and talk about CUSMA, because it's a critical piece of this puzzle. The Canada-United States-Mexico agreement is the backbone of North American trade, and it's been a lifeline for Canada during this tariff war. Roughly 85 to 90% of Canadian exports to the US are tariff-free under CUSMA, including most energy exports. That's a huge deal. It means that while Trump's 35% tariffs are hitting non-CUSMA goods like lumber and steel, the vast majority of Canada's trade with the US is still flowing smoothly. Carney's government has been smart about leveraging CUSMA. In a bold move, Canada recently scaled back some of its retaliatory tariffs on American goods covered by the agreement. Why? To send a clear signal. Canada respects CUSMA and expects the US to do the same. This isn't about giving in. It's about highlighting the value of the trade deal and putting pressure on Washington to play by the rules. By lowering tariffs on things like fruit juice and food staples, Canada's helping its own consumers and manufacturers while showing goodwill in negotiations. But don't mistake this for weakness. Canada's keeping some retaliatory tariffs in place, especially on US steel, aluminum and copper, where the US is still hitting Canada with tariffs as high as 50%. This mix of relief and resistance is deliberate. It shows that Canada's ready to negotiate, but won't roll over. Carney's pacing the talks, setting the terms, and making sure Canada holds its ground. What we're seeing here is more than just a spat over tariffs. It's a clash of strategies. Trump's approach is all about confrontation, using tariffs to create urgency and force concessions. He thrives on the chaos, the headlines, the sense that he's in control. Carney, on the other hand, is playing a slower, more deliberate game. He's lowering costs for Canadians, keeping leverage through energy exports, and building alliances abroad. It's not as flashy as Trump's moves, but it's building resilience for Canada's economy. This trade war is also a reminder of how interconnected North America's economies are. The US relies on Canada for energy, minerals, and more. Canada relies on the US for markets and supply chains. Disrupting that relationship comes at a cost for both sides. Economists estimate that Trump's tariffs could shave 0.25 to 0.3 percentage points off US GDP growth, and that's without retaliation. If Canada and Mexico hit back with their own tariffs, the damage could climb to $75 billion in lost economic output for the US. Canada's not immune either. Job losses could hit 278,000 without retaliation, and up to 510,000 if the trade war escalates. But Canada's energy advantage gives it a unique edge to weather the storm. Let's take a step back and look at the road ahead. Canada's energy strategy is just getting started. The $500 billion investment in infrastructure, the push for LNG exports, the focus on critical minerals. These are long-term plays that could redefine Canada's role in the global economy. Carney's government is betting that by diversifying trade partners and strengthening its energy sector, Canada can not only survive Trump's tariffs, but come out stronger. But there are challenges ahead. The energy sector isn't immune to tariffs, even at 10%. Higher costs could still ripple through to consumers and industries. And while Europe's a promising market, building out LNG infrastructure takes time, years, not months. Plus, there's the question of how far Trump will push. His tariffs aren't just about trade. They're tied to issues like border security and fentanyl smuggling, which Canada argues it's already addressing. Only 1.5% of migrants and 0.2% of fentanyl seized at US borders come from Canada, according to US Customs and Border Protection. So why the harsh tariffs? Some experts, like Inu Manak from the Council on Foreign Relations, say it's less about drugs and more about renegotiating CUSMA to favor US interests. Let's zoom out for a second. The US is Canada's biggest trading partner, gobbling up over 70% of Canadian exports. That's a lot of eggs in one basket, and Trump's unpredictable tariff moves have exposed the risks of that dependency. Carney's response? Double down on Canada's strengths, energy and minerals, and build new bridges to markets like Europe and Asia. This isn't just about surviving the trade war, it's about rewriting Canada's role on the global stage. So, let's break down how Canada's making that happen, starting with the critical minerals that are quietly shaping the future. You might not hear critical minerals and think game changer, but trust me, these are the building blocks of the modern economy. We're talking about stuff like lithium, cobalt, nickel and graphite, key ingredients for electric vehicle batteries, solar panels, wind turbines, and even semiconductors. As the world races to go green and tech keeps advancing, demand for these minerals is skyrocketing. According to the International Energy Agency, global demand for critical minerals could quadruple by 2030. And guess what? Canada's sitting on a gold mine. Well, a lithium mine to be exact. British Columbia alone hosts 16 types of critical minerals, making it a powerhouse in this space. Places like Quebec and Ontario are also rich in nickel, cobalt and graphite. Canada's not just blessed with these resources, it's got the infrastructure and political stability to get them to market reliably. That's a big deal when you compare it to other mineral-rich countries like China or Russia, where geopolitical risks make investors nervous. Canada's pitch is simple. We've got the goods, and you can trust us to deliver. Carney's government is leaning hard into this. That $500 billion investment plan includes funding to connect mines to rail lines to ports, streamlining the supply chain from the ground to global markets. The Port of Montreal, for example, is already a hub for mineral shipments, and its expansion could bring in $140 million a year in new revenue, according to port operators. That's money that can be reinvested into schools, healthcare, or more infrastructure. But it's not just about cash. It's about positioning Canada as the go-to supplier for critical minerals in a world that's desperate for them. Why does this matter? Because the US, Europe, and Asia are all scrambling to secure these minerals. The US, for instance, relies on imports for 80% of its critical minerals, with Canada supplying a big chunk. Trump's tariffs might make it tougher for American companies to buy Canadian steel or lumber, but when it comes to minerals for batteries or solar panels, the US doesn't have a lot of options. This gives Canada another layer of leverage in trade talks. It's like saying, you want to hit us with tariffs? Fine, but good luck building your electric cars without our lithium. Now let's talk about the star of Canada's energy strategy, liquefied natural gas, or LNG. If you caught part one, you know that Canada's making a massive push to become a global LNG player, especially for Europe. This is a huge shift. Just 3 years ago, in 2022, then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said there wasn't a strong business case for shipping Canadian LNG across the Atlantic. Fast forward to 2025, and that idea has been flipped on its head. Why? Because the world's energy landscape has changed dramatically. Europe's been hit hard by its reliance on Russian gas, especially after the Ukraine conflict escalated. Countries like Germany and Poland are desperate to diversify their energy sources, and Canada's stepping up to the plate. With vast natural gas reserves in places like Alberta and British Columbia, Canada has the raw materials to meet that demand. The challenge has always been getting that gas to market, which is where the port of Churchill comes in. Located on Hudson Bay in northern Manitoba, Churchill is being transformed into a gateway for LNG exports. Its position makes it ideal for shipping to Europe via Arctic routes, which are becoming more accessible due to climate change. The port's expansion is a cornerstone of Carney's infrastructure plan, and it's already got investors buzzing. When Carney announced the plan, he said his phone was blowing up, with calls from global firms eager to get in on the action. That's not just hype. Bloomberg reported in August 2025 that LNG project inquiries in Canada surged 40% after the announcement. But LNG isn't just about Europe. It's also about Asia, where countries like Japan and South Korea are hungry for stable energy supplies. By building out LNG infrastructure, Canada's opening doors to markets that reduce its dependence on the US. This is a big deal because it means Canada's not just reacting to Trump's tariffs, it's creating options. If the US wants to play hardball, Canada can say, no problem, we've got buyers in Berlin and Tokyo. To make all this happen, Canada's getting serious about streamlining its processes. Enter the Major Projects Office, set to launch by Labor Day 2025. This new federal agency is all about fast-tracking approvals for big infrastructure projects. Think pipelines, port expansions, and rail lines. It'll coordinate environmental reviews with provinces and territories, cutting through the red tape that slowed down projects in the past. The goal? Get shovels in the ground faster and turn Canada's energy ambitions into reality. This is a big shift for Canada. Historically, major energy projects have faced delays due to environmental concerns, Indigenous consultations, and provincial federal squabbles. The Major Projects Office is designed to tackle those bottlenecks while still respecting environmental and community standards. It's a delicate balance, but Carney's betting that speed and efficiency will attract more investment and get projects online sooner. For example, the LNG Canada project in British Columbia, one of the largest in the country, took nearly a decade to get off the ground. The new office aims to slash those timelines, making Canada more competitive globally. Let's zoom out to the international stage, because Carney's not just focusing on North America. His recent European tour is a masterclass in strategic diplomacy. He's been meeting with leaders in Germany, Poland, and Latvia, pitching Canada as a reliable partner for energy and minerals. But it's not just about trade deals. There's a bigger geopolitical game at play. Europe's in a tough spot. The EU's been grappling with energy security since cutting ties with Russian gas, and Trump's tariffs haven't made things easier. The US recently set a 15% baseline tariff on many EU goods, with higher duties on steel and aluminum. Sound familiar? Canada's watching that situation closely because it's in a similar boat. By stepping in with offers of LNG, oil, and critical minerals, Canada's positioning itself as a lifeline for Europe and a counterweight to US pressure. Carney's meetings aren't just about handshakes and photo ops. They're about building long-term partnerships. For example, Germany's looking to phase out coal and needs clean, reliable energy to bridge the gap. Canada's low-emission natural gas and renewable energy could fit the bill. Poland and Latvia, meanwhile, are keen on strengthening NATO ties and Canada's military presence through Operation Reassurance. Stationing troops in both countries adds weight to its economic pitch. It's like Canada's saying, we're not just a supplier, we're a partner in security and stability. This European push is also a subtle jab at the US. By diversifying its trade partners, Canada's sending a message, we don't need to rely on you. If Trump wants to keep raising tariffs, Canada's got other options, and those options are growing. The EU-Canada Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, or CETA, signed back in 2016, already gives Canada preferential access to European markets. Carney's building on that foundation, and it's starting to pay off. Back in North America, let's talk about how Canada's navigating the Canada-United States-Mexico agreement, or CUSMA. This trade deal is a lifeline in the tariff war, covering about 85 to 90% of Canada's exports to the US, with zero tariffs. That includes most energy exports, which is why Canada's oil, gas and electricity keep flowing south even as Trump turns up the heat. But Carney's not just relying on CUSMA's protections, he's using it as a strategic tool. In a recent move, Canada rolled back some of its retaliatory tariffs on American goods covered by CUSMA, like fruit juice and food staples. This wasn't a surrender, it was a calculated play. By lowering these tariffs, Canada's helping its own consumers and manufacturers who rely on US imports, while also signaling to Washington that it values the trade deal. The message? We're playing by the rules. Your move, Trump. At the same time, Canada's keeping some retaliatory tariffs in place, especially on US steel, aluminum and copper, where the US is hitting Canada with tariffs as high as 50%. This mix of cooperation and pushback is deliberate. It shows Canada's willing to negotiate but won't be bullied. Carney's pacing the talks, keeping the pressure on Washington to respect CUSMA's framework. It's like a chess game. Canada's not making rash moves, it's thinking 3 steps ahead. Now let's flip the script and look at things from the US perspective, because this trade war isn't just about Canada. Trump's pushing a big agenda to bring manufacturing back to American soil, but there's a catch. You can't run factories without energy. And right now, the US is facing an energy crunch. According to the US Energy Information Administration, energy prices in the US are climbing at more than twice the rate of inflation, 5.5% versus 2.7% in the past year. Nearly 60 utility companies are planning rate hikes in 2025, adding $38 billion to electricity bills and $3.5 billion to natural gas costs. Why is this happening? Demand for power is surging. Think data centers for AI, electric vehicles, and the push to electrify everything. The US grid is struggling to keep up, and Trump's tariffs aren't helping. His 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum, plus new duties on electrical equipment, are driving up the cost of building new power plants or upgrading the grid. Coal plants are being kept online longer, but that's expensive and unpopular. New gas plants? They take years to build and turbine costs have tripled. It's a mess. This is where Canada comes in. The US relies on Canada for over 4 million barrels of oil a day, 8 billion cubic feet of natural gas, and more than 80% of its electricity imports. Oh, and that uranium? A quarter of what fuels US nuclear plants comes from Canada. Trump might talk tough, but he knows the US can't afford to alienate its biggest energy supplier. That recent phone call between Trump and Carney, described by Ottawa as a wide-ranging talk on trade and economic priorities, wasn't just small talk. It was a sign that even Trump recognizes Canada's role in keeping America's lights on. What's so fascinating about Canada's approach is how it balances short-term survival with long-term ambition. Carney's not just trying to outlast Trump's tariffs, he's building a Canada that's less vulnerable to future shocks. That means investing in domestic infrastructure, like railways and power lines, to support industries like lumber and manufacturing at home. It means strengthening ties with Mexico, which got blindsided by Trump's tariffs too, to create a united North American front. And it means betting big on energy and minerals to make Canada indispensable globally. Take the domestic focus for a second. Canada's launching billion-dollar support packages for sectors hit by tariffs, like $1.2 billion for softwood lumber and similar aid for steel. These aren't just bailouts. They're about keeping jobs and building markets within Canada. For example, new programs are encouraging Canadian builders to use Canadian lumber, reducing reliance on US buyers. It's a smart way to cushion the blow while creating long-term stability. Then there's the Mexico angle. Both Canada and Mexico are feeling the tariff squeeze, and they're starting to coordinate more closely. Meetings between Carney's team and Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum in 2025 focused on energy security and critical minerals. It's like they're saying, if the US wants to play tough, we'll work together to build our own resilience. This could be the start of a stronger North American alliance that doesn't revolve around Washington. Of course, it's not all smooth sailing. Building out LNG infrastructure and new ports takes time, years, not months. Environmental concerns and Indigenous consultations can slow things down, even with the new Major Projects Office. And while Canada's energy sector is insulated from the worst tariffs, that 10% duty on oil and gas still adds costs that could ripple through to consumers. Plus, there's the political side. Provinces like Ontario and Alberta have different priorities. Ontario's Doug Ford wants a tariff-for-tariff fight, while Alberta's Danielle Smith is more cautious. Carney's got to keep everyone on the same page. Then there's Trump himself. His tariffs aren't just about trade. They're tied to hot-button issues like border security and fentanyl. Canada's pushing back, pointing out that only 1.5% of migrants and 0.2% of fentanyl at US borders come from Canada, per US customs data. But Trump's not one for nuance, and his base loves the tough talk. The big question is whether he'll double down or dial back when he sees the economic fallout, like those rising energy bills hitting American voters. You can see how Canada's playing a multi-layered game. Carney's betting on energy, minerals and global partnerships to turn Trump's tariffs into an opportunity. It's about resilience, leverage and redefining Canada's place in the world. But the road ahead is tricky. Trade talks are stalled, domestic politics are heating up, and the US energy crunch is only getting worse. So far, we've talked a lot about big-picture strategies, energy exports, LNG, critical minerals and global trade deals. But let's bring it down to the ground level. How is this trade war affecting everyday Canadians? When Trump slapped that 35% tariff on non-CUSMA goods like lumber, steel and aluminum, the impact was immediate. Small businesses, workers and consumers are feeling the pinch, and it's reshaping lives across the country. Take the softwood lumber industry, for example. Canada's been battling US tariffs on lumber for decades, but the latest 35% duty has hit hard. In British Columbia, where forestry employs over 50,000 people, sawmills are cutting shifts and laying off workers. The Canadian press reported in August 2025 that over 2,000 lumber workers lost their jobs in BC alone since the tariffs escalated. These are real people, families who rely on those paychecks to pay rent, buy groceries and keep the lights on. Small businesses that supply these mills, like trucking companies or equipment dealers, are also struggling as orders dry up. Then there's the consumer side. Tariffs don't just hurt producers, they drive up prices for everyone. Canadian manufacturers that rely on US components like auto parts or machinery are facing higher costs, which get passed on to shoppers. Supermarket shelves are starting to reflect this. For example, the cost of imported goods like orange juice and packaged foods has jumped 5 to 10% in some regions, according to Statistics Canada. That's real money out of Canadians' pockets at a time when inflation's already a concern. But it's not all doom and gloom. Canada's energy sector, as we've discussed, is a bright spot. While lumber and steel take a beating, oil, gas, and electricity exports are still flowing to the US with only a 10% tariff, keeping thousands of jobs in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Quebec stable. Plus, Carney's government has rolled out support packages, like $1.2 billion for the lumber sector and similar aid for steel, to cushion the blow. These aren't just band-aids, they're helping keep communities afloat while Canada builds new markets abroad. Speaking of Carney, let's talk about the tightrope he's walking at home. Managing a trade war with the US is tough enough, but doing it while keeping Canada's diverse provinces and political factions on the same page, that's next level. Canada's a federation, and each province has its own priorities. Ontario's Premier Doug Ford, for instance, has been vocal about wanting a tariff-for-tariff fight with the US. He's pushing for aggressive retaliation to protect manufacturing jobs in his province, which is Canada's industrial heartland. Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith, on the other hand, is more cautious, knowing her province's oil and gas exports are a lifeline that can't be jeopardized by escalating tensions. Carney's approach has been to thread the needle. After Trump's tariff deadline passed in 2025, he convened a virtual summit with provincial premiers and cabinet ministers to align on strategy. The goal wasn't just to update everyone, it was to gauge political support and avoid a fractured response. Carney's been clear, Canada needs to stay united to face this challenge. His decision to roll back some retaliatory tariffs on CUSMA-covered goods like food staples was a nod to provinces like Ontario, where consumers and manufacturers benefit from lower costs. But keeping tariffs on US steel and aluminum shows he's not backing down entirely, which keeps hardliners like Ford happy. This balancing act extends to public opinion. Canadians are frustrated with the tariffs, but they're also wary of a full-on trade war. A 2025 Angus Reid poll found that 65% of Canadians want Carney to negotiate with the US rather than escalate tariffs, but 55% also think Canada should diversify its trade partners to reduce reliance on the US. Carney's reading the room, focusing on long-term resilience, like the $500 billion energy and infrastructure plan, while showing short-term results to keep Canadians on board. Let's zoom out to North America for a moment, because Canada's not in this alone. Mexico's also feeling the sting of Trump's tariffs, and that's creating an opportunity for a stronger Canada-Mexico partnership. Both countries were blindsided by Trump's 35% tariff hike on non-CUSMA goods, and they're starting to find common ground. In 2025, Carney's team met with Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico City to discuss energy security and critical minerals. This wasn't just a courtesy call. It was a strategic move to build a united front. Mexico's a key player in the critical minerals game, with significant deposits of lithium and copper. Like Canada, it's looking to capitalize on the global demand for green tech materials. By coordinating on trade and infrastructure, Canada and Mexico can create a North American supply chain that's less dependent on the US. For example, Canada's expertise in mining and Mexico's manufacturing base could team up to produce batteries or solar panels for global markets. It's like building a North American fortress that doesn't revolve around Washington. This partnership also strengthens Canada's hand in CUSMA talks. With 85 to 90% of Canada's exports to the US tariff-free under the agreement, and Mexico in a similar position, both countries have a vested interest in keeping CUSMA intact. By aligning their strategies, they can put more pressure on the US to respect the deal. It's a subtle but powerful way to counter Trump's America First approach. Now let's flip to the US side, because the energy story isn't just about Canada's strength, it's about America's vulnerability. Trump's pushing hard to bring manufacturing back to the US, but his plan hinges on cheap, reliable energy. The problem? The US is facing an energy crisis. The US Energy Information Administration reported in 2025 that energy prices are rising at 5.5%, more than twice the 2.7% inflation rate. Nearly 60 utility companies are planning rate hikes in 2025, adding $38 billion to electricity bills and $3.5 billion to natural gas costs. That's hitting American consumers hard. What's driving this? Surging demand. Data centers for AI, electric vehicles, and the electrification of daily life are pushing the US grid to its limits. The American Society of Civil Engineers gave the US energy infrastructure a C- grade in 2024, citing aging power plants and transmission lines. Trump's tariffs aren't helping. They're jacking up the cost of steel, aluminum, and electrical equipment needed to upgrade the grid. Building a new gas plant takes years, and turbine costs have tripled. Keeping old coal plants running? That's expensive and unpopular, with regulators warning it'll drive up utility bills even more. This is where Canada's leverage shines. The US relies on Canada for over 4 million barrels of oil a day, 8 billion cubic feet of natural gas, and more than 80% of its electricity imports. A quarter of the uranium powering US nuclear plants comes from Canada too. These aren't just numbers, they're the lifeblood of the US economy. That phone call between Trump and Carney in 2025, described by Ottawa as a productive discussion on trade and economic priorities, wasn't just diplomatic fluff. It was a sign that Trump knows he needs Canada's energy to make his manufacturing dreams a reality. Let's pull back to the global picture. Because Carney's vision isn't just about surviving Trump's tariffs, it's about making Canada an energy superpower. That $500 billion investment in energy and port infrastructure is a bold bet on the future. Beyond LNG and critical minerals, Canada's scaling up solar, wind, hydrogen and nuclear energy, while aiming to make its oil and gas the lowest emission in the world. This isn't just green talk, it's a competitive edge. Europe, Japan and other markets want clean, reliable energy, and Canada's positioning itself as the supplier of choice. The Port of Churchill's transformation into an LNG hub is a prime example. By tapping Arctic shipping routes, Canada can get gas to Europe faster and cheaper than competitors like Qatar. Meanwhile, the Port of Montreal's expansion strengthens Canada's ability to ship minerals and other goods. These projects, backed by the new Major Projects Office, are about more than economics. They're about geopolitics. Canada's saying to the world, we're stable, we're reliable, and we've got what you need. This global push also reduces Canada's reliance on the US market. Over 70% of Canada's exports go south, but by opening new markets in Europe and Asia, Canada's building resilience. If Trump's tariffs get worse, or if CUSMA talks stall, Canada's got options. That's a powerful position for a middle power like Canada to be in. Of course, no plan is foolproof. Building out LNG infrastructure and new ports takes time, sometimes a decade for major projects. Environmental reviews and Indigenous consultations, while necessary, can cause delays, even with the Major Projects Office streamlining things. The 10% tariff on energy exports, while lower than others, still adds costs that could hit Canadian consumers and industries. And then there's the political risk. If provinces start pulling in different directions or public support wanes, Carney's long-term strategy could face headwinds. There's also the question of Trump's next move. His tariffs aren't just about trade, they're tied to issues like border security and fentanyl, which Canada argues are overblown. US customs data shows only 1.5% of migrants and 0.2% of fentanyl at US borders come from Canada. But Trump's base loves the tough rhetoric, and he's shown he's willing to double down, even if it means higher costs for Americans. If he escalates further, say by targeting energy exports more aggressively, Canada's leverage could be tested. As we wrap up this series, let's look at what's next. Carney's playing a long game, building resilience through energy, minerals and global alliances. But the trade war's far from over. CUSMA talks are stalled, with Trump pushing for changes that favor US interests. Economists estimate that a full-blown trade war could cost the US $75 billion in economic output and Canada up to 510,000 jobs if retaliation escalates. Both sides have a lot to lose. Yet there's room for optimism. That Trump-Carney phone call suggests both leaders know they need each other. The US can't power its economy without Canada's energy, and Canada needs access to US markets. A deal that respects CUSMA and eases tariffs could benefit both countries. Carney's approach, mixing cooperation like rolling back some tariffs with pushback like keeping duties on US metals, shows he's ready to negotiate but won't be bullied. The bigger question is whether Canada's energy superpower vision will pay off. If LNG exports to Europe and Asia take off, and if critical minerals become a global cash cow, Canada could emerge from this trade war stronger than ever. But it's a high-stakes bet that requires time, money, and political will. So there you have it, the full story of how Canada's navigating Trump's trade war with a bold energy strategy. From oil and gas to critical minerals and LNG, Canada's turning pressure into opportunity. Carney's not just reacting to tariffs, he's rewriting Canada's economic future, building resilience at home and forging alliances abroad. It's a masterclass in middle power diplomacy, and it's got the world watching. What do you think? Is Canada's energy push the right move, or is it too risky in this volatile trade climate? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let me know if you want more deep dives like this. If you enjoyed this series, give it a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more content on the stories shaping our world. Thanks for sticking with me through all 3 parts. See you in the next one.